A 6-year-old girl is buried alive in her own backyard at the hands of the man called her sole guardian. As each shovelful of earth gradually smothers that faint breath, a reclusive millionaire suddenly appears. A thunderous scream echoes in the night. "Dig her up!" And from that moment, both fate and justice awaken together. The cold moonlight stretched across the desolate land, painting long, grotesque shadows on the ground. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the rustling sound of dry grass in the silent space. George Keller's dilapidated house stood alone in the vast field, its windows rattling in the wind, the walls mottled with the stains of time. On the front porch, Elena, a frail 6-year-old girl with tangled hair, sat huddled, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Elena's round eyes gazed up at the sky, where the moon hung suspended, casting a cold, silver light over the world. She whispered, as if afraid of being overheard, "I miss Mom and Dad so much. I've been good. Please don't leave me." The cold wind seeped through the eaves, carrying warm memories. Her father carrying Elena on his shoulders, running around the park. Her mother bending down to kiss her forehead every night before bed, singing lullabies in a sweet voice. Those memories were now just fragile fragments in her small heart. But now, Elena no longer knew the warmth of family, not since moving in with George Keller, her father's closest friend in his youth. He used to be a seemingly amiable, courteous man, always appearing kind to children. It was this false kindness that made Elena's parents place their complete trust in him. After the tragic car accident that claimed their lives, George became Elena's legal guardian, fair and square. But behind that benevolent facade was a devil in disguise. In reality, George was greedy and ruthless. He had long targeted the $1 million insurance payout left by Elena's parents. He didn't need Elena. He only needed that insurance money and was willing to do anything to get it. Alongside him was Selena Morrow, his lover. She always appeared with a sweet, fake smile in front of the neighbors, but always gave Elena a contemptuous look, along with relentless beatings. "You useless brat! You're just wasting our money." Those words echoed in Elena's ears every day, colder than the night wind. Inside the house, the sound of a beer bottle shattering shattered the silence of the night. "Damn it," George roared, his voice hoarse with alcohol. "The insurance money is still frozen. We have to wait until that brat turns 18 to withdraw it." Selena tossed a cigarette butt on the floor, her voice shrill. "Just letting her live off us like this. Sooner or later, she'll be a nuisance. George, do something. If that kid disappeared, wouldn't the money flow into your pockets immediately? You're the legal guardian after all." George froze, his face flushed red, his eyes flashing with hatred. He panted, like a beast cornered. In a chilling moment, George silently walked towards the corner of the kitchen, pulling out a rusty shovel with a rotten wooden handle. He gripped the shovel tightly, his knuckles white from clenching too hard. Without a word, George opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Selena glanced around, then quietly followed, anxiously watching. Elena heard the door open, turned her head, and her eyes widened in terror when she saw George lumbering towards her, the shovel gleaming silver in the moonlight. "No, Uncle George, I'm sorry," she stammered, backing away. George didn't bother to answer. He grabbed Elena's thin arm, dragging her across the dry grass, despite her weak struggles. "Uncle, I'm sorry. I'll be good," Elena sobbed, her small sobs lost in the wind. Selena stood on the steps, her eyes darting around, toying with a pack of chewing gum. Her eyes were empty, as if watching a cheap entertainment. George dragged Elena to the backyard, where the grass had been trampled into muddy patches. He roughly threw her to the ground. With her weak strength, Elena couldn't escape or resist. She could only try to beg the cruel man she called Uncle. "Please, Uncle George." Elena whimpered, clutching her teddy bear tightly. George bent down, snarling each word. "Your parents thought that little bit of money was enough, huh? I have to feed you, educate you, and I haven't been able to touch a single penny. I'm sick of your face, you little brat. Tonight, I'll make you disappear like you never existed." Elena cowered, her lips trembling. She knew that crying would only make things worse. He plunged the shovel into the ground, starting to dig. Each heavy shovelful echoed like hammer blows, striking straight into Elena's heart. Selina stood a few steps away, casually chewing gum, her pale eyes watching the scene as if watching a bad play. Dirt flew up with each shovelful. A shallow pit gradually formed, black under the moonlight. Elena lay still, tears streaming down her face, clutching her tattered teddy bear as if clinging to the last glimmer of hope. "Mom! Dad, save me!" In her heart, a fragile prayer echoed. Under the bright moonlight, each heavy shovelful of dirt flew up, each particle floating in the air. A cold grave was gradually taking shape. For a child who had just turned 6 years old, the night wind slipped through the decaying clumps of grass, carrying a pungent, musty odor. Under the cold moonlight, the shadows of the two adults stretched long across the hard earth, heavy as specters. Elena Keller trembled, clutching her tattered teddy bear, her bare feet covered in cold, clammy mud. Her eyes, filled with bewilderment, stared at George Keller, the man she once called Uncle with all her trust. Her face, smudged and streaked with tears, she sobbed, whispering, "Please, please spare me, Uncle. Please. I promise to be good. I won't bother you anymore." Her voice was weak, broken, like a fragile, withered leaf in a raging storm. She desperately didn't know what to do to save herself, only repeating that hopeless plea over and over. But George Keller didn't even turn around. He silently scooped up each shovelful of earth, one by one, as if those pleas had never existed. The cold moonlight shone down on his clumsy shoulders, clearly illuminating each steady, cruel movement. Each sound of the shovel digging into the earth rang out dryly, completely denying the small existence begging right beside him. George didn't even bother to glance at Elena. In his eyes now, she was just a useless object that needed to be eliminated for good. After a while, Elena tried to drag her small body towards George, grabbing onto his pants leg. George lowered his face, squinting at the pitiful girl at his feet. Without a trace of pity, his rough hand suddenly struck Elena's cheek with force. Smack! The sound of the slap echoed loudly, tearing through the still air. Her small body was knocked to the ground. Elena let out a dry sob, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. George growled each word like a cold dagger. "Shut up! Your parents are dead. No one loves you anymore, you piece of trash." Elena could only tremble, her two small hands clinging tightly together, her tiny body curled up in pain and despair. From the porch, Selina urged impatiently, "Hurry up, George. It's taking too long. If someone passes by and sees us, we're all dead." She gripped her phone tightly in her hand, her eyes constantly darting around, ready to flee at any moment. George didn't bother to reply. He picked Elena up like he was lifting a lifeless sandbag. "No, please, Uncle, please." Elena choked, her legs kicking wildly in the air, but too weak to escape his rough grip. George strode to the edge of the pit he had just dug. Without a moment's hesitation, he threw Elena straight into the hole. The sound of her small body hitting the ground was heavy. Elena huddled up, looking up at the dark sky, where the moon was now blurred behind a veil of tears. "Please, someone, save me." Her faint cry faded. She tried to reach her small, frail hand out of the ground, hoping against hope that someone would see it. George indifferently picked up the shovel. He began to scoop up each heavy shovelful of earth. Scrape, Scrape. The first handfuls of earth fell on Elena, cold, heavy as hammer blows. Selina stood a few steps away, arms crossed, her eyes indifferently watching George digging. "Hurry up, it's almost dawn," she snapped, her voice hoarse with tension. George gasped for breath, but didn't stop. He filled the pit with earth rapidly, the sound of digging, the sound of heavy breathing merging into a mournful dirge. Elena tried to scream, but the earth filled her mouth, the dust blinding her and causing her to choke. Her small hand tried to reach up, clawing at the side of the pit, but her strength was exhausted. George glanced quickly at Selina, snarling, "One more minute." Almost done. He pressed each shovelful of earth down harder. Elena lay still, feeling the cold earth gradually bury her body. She only had enough strength to whisper in her mind, "Someone save me. Mom, Dad, save me." Above, George threw another handful of earth, completely covering her small legs. 1 second, 2 seconds. Elena's weak breathing gradually faded, disappearing into the damp earth. Selina stamped her foot impatiently. "Hurry up, George! If we get caught, we're all done for." George hissed through his teeth, "I know." "Shut up." He scooped up another shovelful of earth, pushing it hard into the pit. Elena could barely move. Her tattered teddy bear, her only memento, was now also buried under the thick layer of earth. The handfuls of earth falling on her small body became more and more numerous, heavy as hammer blows. Elena's weak, panting breaths gradually faded into silence. She was still trying to reach out her hand, as if grasping at some faint chance. The night wind swept through the fields of dry grass, leaving behind a musty smell and a coldness that seeped into the skin. On the deserted dirt road leading to the outskirts of Morrow, the pale yellow headlights of a black Range Rover pierced the darkness. Daniel Whitaker, 54, sat behind the wheel, his eyes pensive, his face etched with the marks of time and loss. The car crept along silently. No music, no conversation, only the steady hum of the engine and the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. No destination. It was just that tonight he couldn't sleep. Inside, Daniel was an inexplicable restlessness. A vague urge pushed him out of his familiar old mansion and into the night. As he drove through the abandoned fields, he felt his heart heavy. Memories of Claire, his late wife, flooding back. Her gentle smile, always like sunshine warming the empty house. Daniel clearly remembered the times Claire held a tiny infant's onesie in her hands, her eyes shining with fragile hope. "What do you think if it's a girl? I'll teach her to plant flowers, and you'll teach her to ride a bike." Daniel used to laugh, kissing his wife's soft hair. "We'll have a whole little soccer team if you want," Claire would giggle, her eyes sparkling. But years passed. Times of hope, followed by disappointment. Times of trials, followed by heartbreak. One rainy night, Claire sat silently in an armchair, her thin hands clutching the old infant's onesie. Her voice broke like mist. "I guess God forgot about our house, didn't he?" Daniel could only hold her in his arms, unable to speak. Then one day, Claire quietly left. No complaints, no lamentations, only leaving behind an empty house and unfinished dreams that never had a chance to take shape. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. Claire's death left a void in him that nothing could fill. In the lonely years after Claire left, Daniel didn't choose to throw himself into work or escape on extravagant trips. He decided to leave the business world, handing over his business to other associates, selling all his assets in the city, choosing to live in seclusion in this remote countryside. He remembered the late afternoons, standing in the small shelters in the poor town. The children's eyes looked at him, both frightened and yearning for a warm embrace. Once, Daniel picked up a skinny little boy, whispering softly, You'll be okay. I promise." Then he told himself, his voice hoarse in his empty chest, "For Claire. For the dreams she never got to fulfill." He had once spent money to rebuild a home for abused children in Little Rock, helped a 12-year-old boy escape from an alcoholic father, took an orphaned girl to a concert hall to hear the sound of a violin under the stage lights for the first time. But every night, when he returned to his vast mansion, Daniel still felt chillingly empty. He knew, no matter how many children he saved, it couldn't bring Claire back. But Daniel continued, day after day, because it was the only way to fill the shattered void in his heart. "If I can't be a real father," Daniel whispered on a cold, windy night, "at least I can be a support for someone." And tonight, as he was slowly driving around a hidden curve, Daniel suddenly spotted an old house by the side of the road. The house was dark, dilapidated, like a ghost blending into the night. However, from the backyard, a faint light behind the old house caught his eye. Daniel felt his heart beat faster than ever. Daniel frowned. That light, it wasn't normal, not the light from a living room, not a household light. It was hidden, mysterious. A cold feeling ran down Daniel's spine. He slowly stepped on the brake, stopping the Range Rover a few hundred meters away, turning off the headlights. The words of an old friend, a social activist, suddenly echoed in his head. "If you see wrongdoing and remain silent, you will forever be a criminal." Daniel gripped the steering wheel for a long time. Then he breathed out heavily, took an old flashlight from the passenger seat, and got out. The cold night wind whipped at his face. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, cautiously walking towards the house. The trees swayed in the moonlight, the crickets chirped. Everything was tinged with a heavy, unsettling color. Daniel followed the dilapidated wooden fence, moving low to the ground, the flashlight beam close to the ground, avoiding attracting attention. When he reached the backyard, he stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the gaps between the trees, Daniel saw a sight that froze his blood. A large man, his face flushed red with alcohol, was holding a shovel, scooping heavy shovelfuls of earth, throwing it into a shallow pit he had just dug. At the bottom of the pit, a small body, shivering in waves, was trying to reach out of the pit. Daniel took a step back instinctively, his heart almost stopping. He leaned his back against the nearest tree, took a deep breath, and shined the flashlight again, more carefully. There was no mistaking it. A child was being buried alive. Blood boiled in Daniel's veins, his hand clenched so tightly that his knuckles cracked. He looked around. No one else, no lights from neighboring houses, no one to call for help. Only him. And the child was about to be buried in the cold earth. Daniel gripped the flashlight so tightly that his palms were sweating. He whispered to himself, "I can't stand by and watch." He couldn't. His hand trembled not with fear, but with anger. A pure, burning anger. Daniel gritted his teeth, pushing aside all reason, pushing aside all fear. He didn't need to know who the man was. He didn't need to know how dangerous it was. He only knew he had to save that child. At all costs. The moonlight, like a silver silk, stretched across the cold, empty ground, illuminating every broken blade of dry grass under heavy footsteps. The atmosphere was stifling, so silent that one could hear every sharp clang of the shovel striking the earth. Daniel Whitaker stood in the shadows, his hand gripping the flashlight so tightly that his knuckles were white. Before him, George Keller was hunched over, scooping up earth, each shovelful, heavy as a crime-taking shape. Selina Morrow, standing a few steps away, anxiously looked around, occasionally glancing at her watch, her face full of impatience. Daniel didn't hesitate any longer. He burst out of hiding. As he ran, Daniel pulled out his phone, turning on the camera, to record the horrific scene. His voice rang out, like thunder in the night. "Stop! Dig her up! Now!" George started, dropping the shovel to the ground. His whole body froze, stiff as a statue. Selina gasped. She staggered over, hiding behind George, her voice trembling. "George, we've been exposed. What do we do now?" Daniel took a few more steps, shining the flashlight directly into George's face. The cold light revealed every drop of sweat rolling down his flushed face. Daniel's voice was icy. "I've recorded everything. A small life, and you are going to bury her alive." George stammered some meaningless words, his face turning from red to pale white. Selina clutched George's sleeve, screaming in panic. "Run, George! Hurry!" Without thinking further, George pushed Selina in front of him and ran towards the dark forest behind the house. Selina stumbled after him, falling once but still frantically getting up, running like a person possessed. Daniel didn't chase after them. He only watched them go, his eyes cold as steel. Without wasting another second, Daniel knelt down beside the newly buried mound of earth. He threw his phone aside, using both bare hands to dig frantically. Dirt clung to his fingernails, tearing his skin, drawing blood, but Daniel didn't care. Each handful of earth he threw out of the pit was heavy as lead. He pushed hard, pushed even harder, his palms bleeding, his heart pounding in his chest. "Not too late. Not too late," Daniel repeated in his head, like a prayer. After only a few minutes, his hand touched something soft and cold. A small body. Daniel went numb. He hurriedly brushed the dirt off Elena's face. Her pale face appeared in the moonlight, her lips purple, her eyes tightly closed. "No, no," Daniel mumbled, trembling as he lifted the little girl out of the pit. Elena let out a weak groan. "I'm scared." The tiny sound was like a thunderclap in Daniel's heart. She was alive. Daniel held Elena tightly to his chest, his trembling hand gently patting her back, trying to dispel the cold that was surrounding her. "You'll be okay, little one. I swear to you," he whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. Without hesitation, Daniel carried Elena straight to the Range Rover, parked a few hundred meters away. He opened the car door with his elbow, gently placing Elena in the passenger seat. While wrapping her in his thick coat, Daniel checked her breathing. Weak, but still there. He sighed in relief, then sped off like a whirlwind. The wheels crunched on the dirt road, roaring and tearing through the night. Daniel sped through the small roads without needing to orient himself, only knowing that he had to get to the nearest hospital as quickly as possible. While driving, he kept glancing at Elena. She was huddled up, trembling, her small face pale. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He vowed to himself he would not let this child fall into darkness again. No one. Nothing would be allowed to hurt this little girl again. On the road, the rare streetlights flashed past like lightning bolts in the night. Inside the car, there was only Elena's weak breathing and Daniel's pounding heartbeat. He leaned down, gently squeezing the small hand lying cold on the seat. "Hold on, little one. Please don't let go." On the way to the hospital, Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his eyes never leaving Elena's pale face. "Please don't let go, kiddo," he whispered, like a prayer sent into the night. The cold white lights washed over the silent hallways of Morrow County's rural hospital. The clock read nearly 1 in the morning, the space enveloped in a stifling quiet, broken only by the steady hum of the air conditioning and the distant wail of an ambulance siren. Daniel Whitaker sat on the hard plastic chairs, his hand clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. His eyes never left the closed door of the emergency room. Behind that door, Elena was fighting. He felt every heartbeat in his chest, as if it were about to burst. As soon as the car arrived at the hospital gate, Elena had been rushed straight into the emergency room. Daniel could only stand and watch, helpless. Dr. Morris, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, was directly in charge of the emergency care. He signaled the nurse to prepare a ventilator while constantly issuing instructions. Check everything. Don't miss a single detail. Elena's face was pale, her small body lost in the white blankets, almost disappearing among the cold medical equipment. Daniel stood there, his feet as if nailed to the floor. Time passed with suffocating slowness. 1 hour, then 2. Finally, the emergency room door swung open. Dr. Morris came out, holding a medical file in his hand. His eyes were heavy. Daniel jumped up, moving quickly towards him. Dr. Morris looked at him, his voice low and firm. "The girl is out of danger, but—" He paused for a moment, then opened the file. "The girl has many old bruises, signs of strangulation, bruises on her biceps, fractured ribs. Furthermore, she shows signs of prolonged malnutrition. These are clearly signs of long-term abuse." Daniel was speechless. His jaw clenched so tightly that his jawline stood out sharply. A cold anger spread throughout his body. He said, through gritted teeth, "That bastard will pay. I swear." Dr. Morris nodded, his eyes grave. "We have notified Child Protective Services. But if you are a relative, the girl needs support right now." Daniel tightened his grip on the file in his hand. "I'm not a relative, but I won't leave here," he said, resolutely. The hospital room was neatly cleaned in the soft yellow light. Elena lay motionless on the small bed, the thick blanket covering her up to her neck. The clock in the room ticked steadily. Outside the glass window, the faint moonlight shone down on the deserted streets of the town. Daniel sat quietly by the bedside. His hand still clasped Elena's small hand tightly, as if he let go, she would slip back into that cold nightmare. Suddenly, Elena stirred. Her small eyes slowly opened, clouded with pain and fatigue. She whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't know you. Why did you help me?" Daniel leaned down, his voice warm and gentle as the breath of the night wind. "I don't know you either, but let's get to know each other now." He smiled softly, reaching out his hand. "Hello, I'm Daniel." Elena blinked, trying to force a weak smile. Her small hand trembled as she took Daniel's hand. "I'm Elena." Her voice was as fragile as a thread about to break, but in those eyes, there was still a deep-seated fear. Elena looked around the unfamiliar room, her hands clutching the edge of the blanket. She tried to fight off the sleepiness, her eyelids heavy, but every time she closed them slightly, memories of the darkness, of the shovel blade, flooded back. Elena hesitated to ask, her voice as small as a mosquito's buzz. "Are you a good person?" Daniel didn't hesitate, looking straight into her eyes. His eyes lit up, steadfast as steel. "I'm the person who will defeat the bad guys to protect you." Elena blinked. For the first time in months, she saw an adult looking at her like that, without malice, without indifference, only warmth, trust, safety. Daniel gently squeezed Elena's hand, reassuring her, "Rest easy, little one. I'll be here. No one can hurt you anymore." Elena nodded slightly. She slowly relaxed her small body, her eyes still fixed on Daniel, as if afraid that if she became distracted for even a moment, he would disappear. But Daniel remained there, silent, steadfast as a lighthouse in a stormy night. And then Elena's breathing gradually evened out. She fell into a deep sleep, her small face relaxed under the soft yellow light. Beside her, Daniel remained still, his hand not letting go, his eyes never leaving her. "You're not alone anymore, little one." Those whispered words, like a vow, etched deep in Daniel's heart. Around 4 a.m., the hospital was as silent as a tomb, only the air conditioning breathing softly on the ceiling. Daniel pulled out his phone, dialing the number of an old acquaintance. A private investigator, a former FBI agent, now retired, but his skills still sharp as a razor. The call connected after only 3 rings. Daniel went straight to the point. "I need an investigation into a little girl named Elena, 6 years old, severely abused. Find every piece of information you can." The voice on the other end was firm. "Understood. I'll look into it immediately." Less than an hour later, Daniel's phone rang. He went out into the hallway to answer. The investigator's hoarse voice rang out. "Elena, her parents died in an accident. I followed the records. Elena's current legal guardian is a man named George Keller, a close friend of her parents." Daniel paused. George Keller. The name alone was enough to make his heart fill with a bad premonition. He tightened his grip on the phone. "Dig deeper into George Keller. Everything to me." "Understood. Give me more time." 2 hours later, the phone rang again. Daniel held the phone to his ear. The investigator's voice, this time, carried a hint of unease. George Keller used to use the alias Marcus Willer. 7 years ago, he was arrested for child abuse in another state. Thanks to hiring a good lawyer, he escaped with a light sentence, then disappeared. It seems he tried to befriend the girl's family and gained their trust. After they died, guardianship of the child fell to him. The girl is entitled to an insurance payout of up to $1 million when she turns 18. I think this is the motive for him to harm the girl. Daniel closed his eyes, his hand clenching into a fist. His breathing was heavy. "Send all the documents to me. Immediately." "Sent. Good luck." The call ended. But in Daniel's heart, a storm of anger had risen, ready to sweep away everything in its path. The call ended. Daniel took a deep breath, the smoldering anger in his heart, now a blazing fire. Without hesitation, he printed all the evidence. Elena's medical report, the video of George burying the girl at night, George's criminal record. He put everything into a thick file, then got in his car and drove straight to the Morrow County Police Station. In the brightly lit office, Police Chief Hayes, a tall man with sharp eyes, opened the file. He watched the video Daniel had recorded, his face growing more and more grave. At the part where George was covering Elena's small body with earth, the police chief slammed his hand on the desk. "No need for anything else. Issue an arrest warrant immediately." Daniel sat opposite him, his eyes cold as ice. No satisfaction, no relief, only determination. "When you catch him, I'll be here. I want to see him pay for his crimes with my own eyes." Police Chief Hayes nodded. "You'll have your wish, Mr. Whitaker." A decisive tap of a pen echoed as Hayes signed the arrest warrant. A dark chapter had officially begun to close. Along with the decisive tap of the pen signing the arrest warrant, a dark chapter had begun to close. George Keller had no idea that the net was tightening around his neck. The faint moonlight drifted through the grey clouds, casting a chillingly cold light over the town of Morrow. In the hazy mist, George Keller's old wooden house appeared like a wandering ghost in the night. The old pickup truck turned into the yard, its wheels crunching on the decaying grass, leaving long, winding tracks. George Keller opened the car door and jumped out. Selena Morrow trailed behind, her hands trembling as she clutched a handbag stuffed with cash and fake documents. "Hurry!" George hissed, his eyes darting sharply across the front yard. They had been on the run all night. At this moment, the sky was just beginning to turn a pale grey. It was still dark. But there wasn't much time left. George hurried into the house, rummaging through the pile of papers, fake passports, and spare keys. Selina staggered after him, her face ashen. "We have to go now, George. If the police find out—" "Shut up!" George snapped, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and fear. He stuffed everything into a backpack, pulling the zipper shut tightly. The instinct for survival urged him to run, as fast as possible. As he rushed out into the yard, George's eyes inadvertently swept across the empty ground behind the house. He froze. His eyes widened. His mouth gaped open. The pit where he buried Elena, empty. The earth had been dug up. Chaotic footprints were still clearly visible on the wet ground. George stood frozen for a moment, as if the whole world had just collapsed beneath his feet. Then, suddenly, he roared, "Impossible!" She should be dead. The scream echoed across the desolate land. Selina ran over, grabbing George's arm tightly, her eyes wide with panic. "You're so stupid, George. I told you to make sure." George spun around, his eyes murderous. He grabbed Selina, yanking her violently. "Shut up! You can't do anything right either. If I get caught, you're going down with me." Selina wrenched herself away, the two of them screaming at each other, their breaths coming in ragged gasps in the cold mist. "Don't blame me," Selina shouted. "You brought this on yourself." "No more arguing," George hissed through his teeth, his eyes blazing with anger. He turned abruptly, dragging the bag of luggage and throwing it into the truck bed. Selina hastily climbed into the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she locked the door. George jumped into the driver's seat, inserted the key, and stepped on the gas. The engine roared, the car shuddering as it shot forward towards the dusty, dirt road. But they didn't know. From afar, behind a thick bush, a faint headlight flashed. A police car had been parked there for a long time. The officer used the radio, his voice cold. "Target has appeared at the scene. Request immediate backup." Just a few minutes later, red and blue lights began flashing at the end of the road. The sound of sirens echoed in the frigid air, tearing through the night. George saw the lights flashing in the rearview mirror. He cursed, his hand gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Damn it! They're here!" Selina cowered in her seat, her face pale. "George! Do something!" George stepped on the gas harder, the car roaring straight onto the highway. A cloud of dust billowed up behind them. Checkpoints had been set up at major and minor intersections around the town. The commanding officer, his hand gripping the radio tightly. "Don't let them escape Morrow County. Order to fire warning shots if necessary." George's pickup truck sped madly on the bumpy dirt road. The wheels skidded, crashing into potholes. Selina screamed, "Slow down! You'll kill us both!" George gritted his teeth, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Shut your mouth. If we get caught, no one will survive." The car swerved wildly onto the main highway. In the distance, police lights flashed, blocking the road. George turned the steering wheel sharply, turning onto a side road. But the net had already been cast. From all directions, the sound of sirens roared. Red and blue lights surrounded them. George desperately stepped on the gas one last time. The pickup truck roared, plunging into the darkness. But he knew every exit had been blocked. The pickup truck roared wildly into the thick darkness. But George Keller didn't know that. The net of the law had been cast on every road he intended to take. The night wind swept through the deserted highways, carrying a bone-chilling cold. The faint moonlight illuminated the dusty dirt roads, desolate under a sky devoid of any house lights. George Keller's old pickup truck roared, skidding along the pothole-ridden road. Selina Morrow sat in the passenger seat, her hand gripping the door handle tightly, her face ashen. George glanced in the rearview mirror. The flashing red and blue lights grew closer and closer. He cursed, slamming his foot on the accelerator. "I won't let them catch me! No way!" The car swerved onto a small dirt path, dust billowing behind them. From afar, the sound of sirens tore through the night, as cold as a knife cutting through the air. Inside the car, Selina's breath came in gasps of panic. "George, we can't escape. They'll set traps everywhere." George gritted his teeth. "Shut your mouth. I haven't given up yet." At Morrow County Hospital. Daniel Whitaker stood by the window of the hospital room, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. Police Chief Daniels's voice rang clearly. "The target is heading towards Highway 67. We have set up checkpoints at all intersections." "Don't worry, Mr. Whitaker," Daniel replied curtly. "I'm not worried. I'm acting." Immediately after the call, Daniel dialed a private number. On the other end, a man's voice rang out. "Whitaker security team, listening." Daniel didn't mince words. Full support. Target, George Keller. Priority, capture alive. Do not let him escape. A child is betting her life on us. "Understood, Mr. Whitaker." In the hospital room. Elena dozed off under the soft yellow light, but her small body still twitched occasionally, her tiny hand clutching the bedsheet tightly. Daniel gently sat down on the edge of the bed, his large hand taking her cold hand. He whispered, "Everything will be over soon, little one. You're safe now." Elena stirred slightly. Her small face relaxed a little, her breathing gradually becoming more stable. For the first time in years, Elena found a faint glimmer of peace. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his eyes determined. "As long as you're still breathing, I won't let go." Outside, the chase entered a critical stage. The pickup truck sped through the small roads. George tried to evade, constantly swerving, turning into dark, nameless trails. But no matter which direction he ran, the red and blue lights were always looming ahead. Over the radio, Police Chief Daniel's voice rang out decisively. "Target is heading straight for Checkpoint Bravo. All units ready. Do not allow passage." A young officer replied, his voice stern. "He's a dangerous man. We won't let him escape." George growled, "Damn it! They've surrounded me." Selina burst into tears, her hands covering her face. "I don't want to go to jail, George. I don't want to." George slammed his fist on the steering wheel in a fit of rage. "Then shut up and pray." He slammed his foot on the gas, the pickup truck roaring, speeding forward like crazy. A checkpoint appeared before them, an iron barrier across the road, behind which were 3 dark SUVs, blocking every escape route. George gritted his teeth, intending to crash straight into the barrier. But just then, 2 police cars darted out from both sides of the road, blocking them tightly. Selina screamed. George swerved sharply, veering to the right, but before they could go far, from the trees on the side of the road, 4 more SUVs sped out, their headlights shining straight into the windshield. The radio blared. "Target has been surrounded. Demand immediate surrender." George slammed on the brakes. The pickup truck screeched to a halt in the middle of the road, its wheels screeching on the asphalt. Inside the car, the air froze. Selina covered her face and sobbed. George sat stunned behind the wheel, sweat pouring down his face. There was no escape. There was no hope. From the police car, an officer used a loudspeaker to shout, "Get out of the car! Hands up! Drop your weapons!" George roared hopelessly, slamming his hand on the dashboard. "Damn it! Son of a bitch!" Selina opened the car door first, her hands raised high, trembling as she stepped out. George hesitated for a second. Then he also opened the door, his hands raised, his face pale. Immediately, 2 police officers rushed over, pinning them to the ground, handcuffing their hands behind their backs. George hissed through his teeth, his eyes flashing with a final glimmer of resentment. "I won't forgive you, Daniel Whitaker. I swear." Those weak threats vanished into the cold night. The cold handcuffs tightened around his wrists. Ahead, the flashing red and blue lights tore through the night. And in Daniel's heart, for the first time in months, a small light flickered in the dark sky. Inside the Morrow Town police station, The old red brick walls glowed under the cold white neon lights. The small courtyard in front of the building was deserted, with only the echoing sound of police boots in the night. Daniel Whitaker sat quietly in the waiting room, his icy gaze looking through the frosted glass. 2 hours earlier, at the hospital, Daniel received a call from the police chief. His voice was brief, full of satisfaction. "We have captured George Keller and Selena Morrow. You can come to the police station if you want." Daniel tightened his grip on the phone, his lips pressed together. Without saying another word, he stood up, put on his coat, and prepared to leave. But before leaving the hospital, he stopped by Elena's room. She was still lying on the bed, her eyes half open, her gaze dreamy. When Daniel entered, Elena stirred slightly, her voice whispering weakly, "Uncle, are you coming back?" Daniel leaned in, squeezing her small hand. A warm smile spread across his usually stern face. "I promise, little one. I'll definitely come back to you. I'm not going anywhere." Elena's eyes softened, her trembling eyelashes closing. Daniel sat there for a few more minutes, watching her breathe evenly, before stepping outside. At the police station, Daniel walked through the cold hallway, the harsh, white lights shining on tired faces. Behind the one-way glass, George Keller sat slumped in a chair. His wrists were cuffed tightly behind his back. His face was ashen, his eyes dark circles from lack of sleep, from fear. Selena Morrow sat a few meters away, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her head bowed, her whole body trembling. Daniel stood silently, his hand clenched into a fist, emotions churning in his chest. There was no need to shout, no need to smash things. He just approached the glass, lowered his head, and whispered, but each word, heavy as a bullet, pierced through the glass. "You buried a child, but my conscience will bury you with eternal guilt." George raised his head, his eyes empty, his mouth moving as if to say something, but no sound came out. He knew. It was all over. 1 week later, the Morrow County Courthouse was packed. Daniel sat in the front row, silently observing. Judge Watson, an elderly man with silver hair, sat solemnly on the bench. On the left, George Keller, in an orange prison jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his eyes bloodshot but helpless. On the right, Selena Morrow, her face pale, her shoulders shaking intermittently. Evidence was presented to the court. The video Daniel recorded of George burying Elena alive. A detailed medical report, bruises, fractures, malnutrition, a criminal record of abuse under the name Marcus Willer. All were undeniable. The prosecutor stood up, his voice cold. Defendant George Keller is charged with first-degree attempted murder, aggravated child abuse, and falsifying legal identity. He turned to Selena. Defendant Selena Morrow is charged with accomplice to child abuse. George shook his head, muttering like a madman. Selena burst into tears, covering her face. No one pitied them, not a single person. The trial ended quickly. Judge Watson banged the gavel, his voice resounding throughout the room. George Keller, 35 years in prison, no parole. Selena Morrow, 15 years in prison. No applause. Only a cold, heavy silence. George slumped down in his chair, his face ashen. Selena covered her face and sobbed. But it was too late for tears of regret. Daniel stood up, not looking at them again. Outside the courthouse, the sky was clear and high. Daniel took a deep, cold breath. Not exactly peaceful, but somewhere in his heart, there was a small, fragile but radiant streak of light. For the first time in a long time. Outside the cold walls of the police station, the first rays of dawn shone down on the town. And Elena, the little girl who had been buried in darkness, now, for the first time, was truly free. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a soft, pale yellow glow on the floor. Outside, the sky over the town of Morrow was clear, silent, as if it had never witnessed the horrors of the night. Inside the hospital room, Elena lay nestled in the small bed. She was no longer as thin as the first day Daniel carried her out of the ground. The bruises on her arms and legs were fading. Her ribs had also stabilized after a period of persistent treatment. But what made Daniel happiest wasn't her healed body. It was her smile. Elena smiled again. One warm afternoon, Daniel sat on the wooden chair next to her bed. The pale yellow light shone on her loose, tangled brown hair. Elena was intently coloring in a coloring book that Daniel had bought. Her eyes shone with a rare fascination. Daniel smiled, gently speaking. "I have good news for you, Elena." Elena looked up, her thin hair fluttering. Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice gently. "George and Selena have been caught. They will never hurt you again. I promise." A moment of silence passed. Then, very softly, those tiny lips broke into a smile. A real smile. Complete. Warm. Daniel almost burst into tears. The day Elena was allowed to leave the hospital, the sky was crystal clear. Daniel stood next to the bed, holding the small coat he had just bought, his eyes warm. "Are you ready, little princess?" Elena pursed her lips and nodded. She didn't say much, but her eyes, the way she took Daniel's hand, said it all. Before leaving the hospital, Daniel sat down, asking in a low but gentle voice, "Do you want to come home with me, Elena?" "Only if you really want to." Elena looked at him, her eyes lighting up. Without hesitation, she nodded vigorously. Daniel laughed, leaning down and hugging her tightly. "Good. Let's go home." Daniel had prepared everything. Even while Elena was still in the emergency room, he had quietly initiated the process of applying for legal adoption. With all the evidence, goodwill, and his reputation, Daniel was easily approved. The Morrow town authorities wanted nothing more than for that poor girl to live a new life. That morning, the black Range Rover rolled out of the hospital. Elena sat in the passenger seat, hugging the old teddy bear that Daniel had rescued from the mud. Her round eyes gazed through the window, admiring the fields stretching out under the sun. The gates of the Whitaker estate opened. The large house appeared amidst a garden of vibrant wildflowers. Elena's eyes widened at the scene before her, a world completely different from the dilapidated dark house she used to live in. Daniel stopped the car, turning to her. "Welcome home, little one." Elena didn't answer. She just pursed her lips, but her eyes sparkled like a spring lake. Throughout the morning, Elena was led by Daniel to explore every corner. The bright kitchen, smelling of freshly baked bread. The large living room, hung with gentle landscape paintings. The library was filled with books, where Claire used to spend hours reading fairy tales, and the garden behind the house, a sea of white, yellow, and purple daisies fragrant under the sun. Elena ran and jumped everywhere, her brown hair flying in the wind. The sound of giggles echoed in the high sky. Daniel stood from afar, his arms crossed, his eyes filled with love. Claire had dreamed of this image. Now, that dream, finally, had come true. Evening came. In her new bedroom, Elena lay nestled in the bed, covered with soft white sheets. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, holding a comic book. The yellow light shone on his kind face. Elena listened, her big round eyes drooping with sleepiness. Daniel's voice was warm, echoing softly in the quiet room. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Elena. Elena giggled, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Daniel closed the book, leaning down and kissing her lightly on the forehead. Good night, little angel." Elena looked up at him, hesitating. Then, in a tender whisper, "Uncle Daniel, can I call you Daddy?" Daniel went silent. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then his heart suddenly burst in his chest. He leaned down, hugging her tightly, his hands trembling, his voice choked. "For me, that's the greatest honor of my life, Elena." Elena snuggled deep into Daniel's arms, safe, peaceful, like a small bird finally finding a nest after a storm. That night, Daniel sat by the bed for a long time, watching Elena sleep, listening to her steady, gentle breathing, and vowing silently. No matter what life brought, he would protect this little girl, with everything he had. The gentle light filled every corner of the Whitaker estate, illuminating Elena's dark past, and opening a new journey full of love and hope. The morning sunlight poured across the wide yard, illuminating every blade of grass still dotted with dew. In the garden, birds chirped merrily, like a song welcoming a new dawn. The Whitaker estate was filled with light. Rows of wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze. Ancient trees stretched towards the clear, cloudless sky. The scene was so peaceful that it seemed as if all the darkness of the past had never existed. Elena laughed, her small feet skipping across the soft lawn. Her simple white dress fluttered with each step. Her light brown hair curled gently, sparkling like golden threads in the sun. Daniel stood on the steps, his hands in his pockets, silently observing. His eyes were gentle, filled with love. A year ago, who could have imagined that this little girl, who had almost been buried in the cold earth, could now laugh and run in the sunlight? "Look at her, like a little ray of sunshine," Daniel murmured to himself, a rare smile spreading across his lips. Elena turned her head, waving. "Daddy, look at me." She twirled on the grass, her arms outstretched, her clear laughter echoing throughout the garden. Daniel stepped down from the steps, walking towards her. He bent down, opening his arms. "Come here, little girl." Elena ran into Daniel's arms, hugging him tightly around the neck. Her sun-scented breath brushed against Daniel's shirt collar. "I love you, Daddy," Elena whispered. Daniel hugged her tighter, his voice choked. "Daddy loves you too, little one." They sat down under the shade of a large oak tree. Daniel took a handkerchief from his pocket, gently wiping the beads of sweat from Elena's forehead. She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling like two jewels. "Daddy, we'll be together forever, right?" Daniel placed a hand on his chest, saying firmly, "As long as Daddy's heart is beating, we'll never be apart." Elena smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. That morning, they gardened together. Elena carefully sowed each tiny seed into the soil, her small hands smudged with dirt, but full of excitement. Daniel stood beside her, occasionally bending down to help her cover the soil and water the plants. "You know," Daniel said softly, "planting a tree is like nurturing a dream. Slowly, patiently, but one day it will bloom." Elena tilted her head to think, then smiled. "So, am I a flower that Daddy planted too?" Daniel laughed, hugging her tightly. "Yes, the most beautiful flower." In the afternoon, Daniel took Elena out to town. They stopped by a small bakery, choosing colorful pastries. Elena's eyes widened when she saw a chocolate-covered cake. "Daddy, is this for me?" Daniel nodded. "It's all for you." She chattered all the way home, hugging the cake box in her arms like a treasure. That evening, the whole estate was filled with the fragrant smell of baking. Daniel and Elena sat together in the living room by the fireplace. She ate cake while listening to Daniel tell stories from the old days, the days when Daniel and Claire had dreamed of a home filled with children's laughter. Elena tilted her head and asked, "Is Aunt Claire sad that she never met me?" Daniel looked up, his eyes tinged with sadness, but then he smiled. She always believed that one day a little angel would come to Daddy. Elena giggled. Then it must be me. Daniel nodded. No doubt about it. Night fell. Elena lay nestled in the small bed, the blanket pulled up to her chest. Daniel sat beside her, holding a book of fairy tales. His warm voice rang out, each word like drops of sweet honey. Elena listened, her dreamy eyes slowly closing. Before falling asleep, she whispered, "I love you so much, Daddy." Daniel leaned down, placing a light kiss on her forehead. "Daddy loves you too, more than anything in the world." Outside the window, the moonlight shone brightly. A gentle breeze blew through the garden, carrying the faint scent of flowers. In the Whitaker estate, the warm light from the golden windows shone on the dew-covered lawn. A real home had been built. No more crying, no more beatings, only love, trust, and dreams nurtured with all their hearts. Daniel sat quietly by the bed, watching Elena sleep. He knew that the journey ahead would have many challenges, but now he was no longer afraid, because beside him was the reason to keep moving forward. Elena, the little flower that had bloomed after the storm. They had found each other in the darkest days, and now, together, they were stepping into the light of a new life. For sometimes, even after the most terrifying nightmare, miracles can still bloom. Ultimately, this story reminds us that, even in the darkest moments, with just one person brave enough and loving enough, miracles can happen. Kindness, courage, and unconditional love are always the light that dispels the darkness of life. So what about you? What lessons have you learned from Daniel and Elena's journey? Is your life peaceful these days? Wherever you are on your journey, I hope you always find the warm light that guides your heart.